Hello, welcome to the sixth in the Modelling the Mind series. I'm Mike Sherwood-Smith, and I'm going to be talking today about my pet subject, which means I have to restrain myself from getting too wordy and going into too much detail, because it's about language, and it's about language and human language ability. And just to recap, we're dealing with the mind system, not the brain, the mind system, and the mind consists of a number of specialized knowledge systems, consisting each of a processor, and a store. A processor is something which I don't include in the graphics, simply because it makes things more complicated. So when you see a store, you must assume a processor. And these stores are interconnected, so these functionally specialized systems form a kind of collaborative network. That is our mind. And here you have where we got to last time. We have auditory system and all the other perceptual systems ranged on the outside, and we have the, as it were, deeper knowledge systems, the value system, the value and emotion system called the affective system, and the conceptual system in the middle there, and they're all connected up so that a representation in one particular store can be associated with one in another. Even though they're coded quite differently, they can be co-activated together. So when you hear a sound, a meaning can pop up, and certainly a value, a positive or negative value, and maybe even some kind of basic emotion. The theme in this talk will be, in respect of language, is this all you need? Is this all you need for human language? And initially it looks as though the answer is yes. If you go to a linguistics course, and you sit there in the first lecture, you'll probably get the definitions, and the simplest definition that pops up usually is that language is a means of associating sounds with meanings. This has to be immediately qualified, of course, because not only sounds are associated with meanings, but visible marks and gestures as well. And this is in line with the general idea that language is a system for communication, for purposes of communication. That's not all it is, as we'll get to later. Here then, answering the question, is that all? We can say, well, yes, with regard to meanings, because we have a meaning system, the conceptual system. Yes, indeed, the answer is yes. And we have a sound system up there. We have the ability to associate sounds with meanings straight away here. So that certainly copes with the simplest definition. And if we get on to the less simple definition, then we've got signs here. And well, we've got a visual system, storing visual representations, and these can all be linked up together. So it looks as though we got everything we need in place. Let's take an example. A concrete example is always nice, isn't it? So let's take a sound. I'm going to make a sound. I'll make one with my voice this time. It's gida, gida. Okay. Now, for you, a lot of you, that will just be a sound, right? It'll be a sound, and it'll be stored here in your auditory system, in the auditory store, and it will sit alongside other sounds, like the sound of a doorbell, for example. All of these things will be coded in the same way, and there will be sounds, not necessarily, in other words, anything to do with language. But this sound that I've made with my voice, gida, can be paired with a meaning, so I better give you a meaning, and I'll give you it in the forms of a symbol, right? So this is the meaning this is the meaning that is being conveyed by the sound ida. As you see, it is a house, I hope you see, and experience in the outside world of being communicated to in particular situations will help you to associate the sound gida with the meaning of house, and our system copes with that admirably, right? And if you ask me what about signs, hand sign, then I say, well, I'll make a hand sign like this, for example, a hand sign, and that can also be associated with the meaning house, and indeed it can be associated with the visual representation as well, so that when one is activated, the other two can be activated at the same time. That's all fine. Right, so talking about signs is a cue for introducing you to Kanzi. Kanzi is a bonobo, and maybe you've seen some of the fascinating videos made by the researcher Sue Savage-Rumbaugh, who is the expert in this area. Anyway, these will show you just everything you need to know about the amazing ability that little Kanzi had. Bonobos, by the way, are a type of chimpanzee. They're highly socialized. I believe they're one species of primate that don't actually kill. They're highly communicative. They spend a lot of time socializing with each other. And his mother, who was the first student, wasn't a very good one, and Sue Savage-Rumbaugh's attention soon shifted to Kanzi, who was showing great curiosity in the set of lexicograms, signs she had on a board, and indeed proceeded to learn more than 400. More than 400 signs, each with an individual meaning, and some of these in combination. And the result was that Kanzi is able to communicate over 3,000, I think, different meanings using this system, which is just amazing. But is that enough for human language? Our system can cope easily with Kanzi's ability, but will it be enough for human? This is a question which has sparked a lot of controversy, but I'm going to side with the many linguists who believe the answer is no. It's not enough for a system of such that can help the developing human need for formulating meanings for reflection, that is cognition, simply sitting there thinking about things in the past, planning things ahead, trying to solve a problem in your head silently, and of course for communicating thoughts, complicated thoughts, to other human beings. Now you might say, well, isn't it just a sort of cleverer version of what Kanzi can do? And some researchers are eager to claim that is the case. Notice, by the way, that human beings are like bonobos, and even more so, are highly communicative and highly socialized. And it's interesting to note that high levels of socialization is often linked with intelligence, so that, for example, members of the cat family, if you just think which type of cat is the most intelligent one, it will in fact be the most socialized one, namely the lion. So it's not surprising that bonobos are so good at this sign system. But human beings have much more to communicate, of course, and this is something we have to consider. Well, sorry. The complexity of the meanings is not everything. For example, it has to be communicated fluently in a long stretch. So not just one or two single words or single signs in the case of Kanzi, each with a single meaning, and perhaps combined with another sign, maybe two other signs occasionally, and probably with detectable breaks. That's certainly not going to be enough to describe human communication, where we have long stretches of unbroken silence. So these complicated meanings that humans communicate with one another in various ways are done with long stretches, and the way these stretches should be broken up into single units for investigating what the single units may mean, and how we can put all those meanings together in a complicated meaning, a message, that's not an easy matter at all. And indeed, if it's signing, it's a long stretch of signs, so you don't know where one sign ends and where another sign begins. We need an ability to do that. A simple segmentation problem is not actually simple at all. So the question is, if this is a real problem, what about Kanzi's stuff? Now remember, when looking at Kanzi's ability, we could be looking at the precursor to the development of human language ability. That's to say, this is maybe what our ancestors were able to do before human language as we know it now evolved. And there's a lot of speculation, of course. We don't have time machines, we can't go back. A lot of speculation about how we began. I don't think we began just with speech or with grunts. So I go along with Michael Tomasello, for example, who believes it was gestures of signing that was the initial type of communication that happened between our ancestors, maybe accompanied by sounds as well, but it was mainly through signing. I think that's very kind of plausible. And it's interesting to see, are there any precursors, signs of these sort of precursors to human language in human behaviour itself? Can we find anything that might suggest something similar to what Kanzi's doing? And I think perhaps the answer is yes, but of course it's not an easy thing to do to compare bonobos with humans, because we know that we can do more, but at least the kind of home signs that are developed between people, adults and children, or either adults and children, who invent signs to communicate with one another when some member of that particular small household cannot speak. These signs look a bit like the sort of signing system we see with Kanzi's. Indeed, with baby signing, which has been, I don't know if it still is fashionable, whereby parents can communicate with their children much more than they would normally be able to communicate before they're able to speak, by developing a sort of system of home signs which are called baby signs. And these mustn't be confused with sign language, but we might regard them as the precursors of sign language. Again, another example might be the very early stages of language acquisition. When you're, for example, learning a new language and you're immersed in the community, you may begin with this. But again, we can't completely make a clear comparison. Also, young children, before they actually start acquiring a language system, and they can, as you know, acquire any language they're exposed to very easily, but in the very early stages there may be a stage which is similar to Kanzi's baby signing. So that's the answer to, are there any examples of such precursors to human behaviour? Yes, with qualifications. Now, the bottom line to all this is that new knowledge systems have had to evolve over the millennia to enable the increased demands placed on these simple precursor systems for advancing the communicative needs and the cognitive needs of early our ancestors, of early humans. And what we believe happened was that a new system had to evolve, it could be exapted, it could be a kind of new use or a reuse of an existing system, but now treated as a separate system, or it might be just something that evolved over time independently. We don't know, of course, but I'm going to give you a version which requires us to add two systems to our mind. A lot of linguists who share this basic point of view would insist only one system needs to be added here, but I'm going to go with Ray Jackendoff and say you need two parallel systems. Now the first system is one that can develop speech representations, and these ones produce so-called speech structures, or the official word is phonological structures, and these can be associated with sounds in the auditory system, right? And the other system is the morphosyntactic system, we'll call it the syntactic system, which allows you to associate with these particular representations a set of rules for combining them into longer and more complex stretches, which then can be associated with meanings. So these two systems have to be added. So let's go and do that now. Let's add the so-called speech system, the phonological system, and we'll put it there, and we'll add the syntactic structure system, that's there, and we'll link it up to the meaning system. So we've got a way of associating that gida sound with speech structures, such as vowel, consonants, syllables, and various complicated versions thereof, and these can be then associated with a set of representations which enable us to combine in various particular ways and not in others, so that these combinations can then be associated with complex conceptual structures, giving us the complicated meanings and the complicated messages that we need for our human beings. Okay, so this was enough for the simple sound meaning associations that we saw with Kanzi, and possibly the precursors of language in the story of a human individual as they grow from 1-year-olds to 2-year-olds and onwards. And now we have to add these two extra systems. So first we'll add the phonological system, and we'll put it in there, and then we'll add the syntactic system, and now we've got everything lined up. It looks as though we've got all that's necessary for human language. Just a word about the phonological system, because it was always thought that speech is primary, and in most cases it is, but as sign language linguists would insist, signs can also be linked up to a speech, what would be the equivalent of a speech structure system, and for the time being they actually use the word phonology, even though it isn't anything to do with sound. So systems can be adapted to cope with the ways of expressing human language. It's really rather unlikely that we would express things with smells, for example, or tastes. But as far as touch is concerned, we do have Braille, of course, but there are limitations there. The visual system in humans and the auditory systems are the most obvious ones to use for language. Okay, so I think there we have answered the two questions which were important to answer. What makes human language human, and what and where is human language in the mind? And our answer, to wind things up, is that what makes language human are these two extra systems that we've added to cope with the enormous demands that humans place on the way they want to think, as it were, and the way they want to communicate. And the answer to the second question is where and what is language? Well, what is language is the totality of the mind. So language is not just these two systems in the middle. Language includes everything. So when we use language, it involves all the other systems, literally all the other systems. That's why language is so important for understanding the mind in general, because language, as we say, is embedded in the mind. And with that, I'd like to finish and tell you that the next topic we're going to be talking about is consciousness and attention. Now, this is an interesting and fascinating and complicated topic, which I will handle in our next presentation. Until that time, you can listen to the other YouTube presentations, and you can visit the Modular Cognition Framework website if you wish, but that's certainly not necessary for the purposes of this series. So I'll bid you goodbye now, and hope that you will be attending next time.